Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this Damp and Mould Action and Awareness Week webinar. I'll just wait a minute or two for the rest of the attendees to come in before getting started. Okay, I think I'll make a start now just because we've got quite a packed speaking list today and some really interesting content to get through. And just start the intros while the rest of the attendees join us today. So yeah, welcome everyone to today's session on effective strategies for managing damp and mould in social housing. We're really glad you can join us here today to hear from a great lineup of speakers to round off Damp and Mould Action and Awareness Week and the webinars that we've been hosting. Today's discussion is going to cover some proactive approaches, assessment techniques, and remediation strategies to effectively address the challenges of damp and mould. We'll hear from landlords about their damp and mould processes, the changes they've had to make, and the ways in which they're integrating different approaches to resolve these issues. We'll also explore how technology plays a key role in early detection, which can help prevent these issues before they escalate, and also about the role of ventilation in prevention and remediation. But before we get started, just a quick couple of housekeeping items. So the webinar is being recorded and we'll share it afterwards for anyone to go back to. It'll be shared on our website. And following the presentations, we're going to have a Q&A session. So please put any questions you might have for our speakers in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we'll come to those at the end. So as I mentioned, we've got a really packed and good lineup of speakers this afternoon. We're really excited to have some experts from housing management, supply chain, and also academia. And I'm sure they'll bring some really valuable insights to today's topic. We have, firstly, will be Rosie Wills, who's Technical Support and Repairs Manager at Mid Devon Council. She manages the responsive repairs team and oversees technical admin team for the combined tenancy and repairs service. She has a keen interest in building pathology, especially in relation to the causes, effects, and management of damp, mould, and condensation. After Rosie, we'll hear from Kerry Dawson, who's operations team leader at Stirling Council. She's responsible for responsive emergency repairs, non-responsive repairs, and complex damp and rot works. She's worked for the Stirling Council for 33 years, undertaking various management roles, predominantly within the housing, property, and assets. In her current role, she's expanded her experience of dealing with damp and mould and is keen to make continuous improvements to protecting Stirling's properties and supporting their tenants to live safely and comfortably within their homes. After Kerry, we'll get a supplier perspective from Ian Jordan. He's RMI Sales Director at Neware. He's worked in Neware for almost 17 years, and that time has been spent in a number of roles within their residential sales force, both in the new build and RMI teams, before promotion to his RMI current role as an RMI Sales Director earlier this year. He now heads up the efforts in targeting refurbishment, maintenance, and investment opportunities in existing housing, with a primary focus on the social housing sector. And then finally, rounding off our speakers today will be Tim Walker. He's Research Associate at the University of Exeter and a Research Fellow at the European Centre for Environment and Human Health. A social geographer by training with expertise in qualitative methods. His current research centres on evaluating the feasibility and societal benefits of home environmental sensors to enhance health outcomes in the social housing sector. A key aspect of this work is the integration of co-design and patient and public involvement to ensure that the systems are tailored to the needs of the community. So without further ado, we're going to go straight over to our first speaker to get things kicked off. That's Rosie Wills here from Mid Devon District Council. Rosie.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm just going to share the screen and then hopefully Sam can just give me a nod when I'm up and running.
Yeah, all good.
Brilliant. So thanks for your attention today. I'm going to give you a snapshot of 3 key projects for us in relation to damp, mould and condensation, which from here on out I'll refer to as DMC. These projects focus on meaningful data collection, environmental monitoring projects, and also nudge. So, as Sam said, I'm Rosie Wills and I'm the Technical Support and Repairs Manager for Mid Devon Housing, and we're part of Mid Devon District Council. We've got about 3,000 properties, so we're a relatively small social landlord. My background originally was in health and social care. I did about 8 years doing that, and then 10 years ago moved across into social housing. And I'm now a responsive repairs manager and surveyor, and I specialise in damp and mould. Being able to work for quite a small organisation and have an oversight over various things has been really, really helpful to get a broader understanding of what's going on. So my DMC journey, it really began in roughly 2017, and it started as just a bit of a learning journey, and then it evolved into a data collection project. And this, I could talk about this for hours, but at the end of that project, which went on for a few years, what we were able to do is put some of what we'd learned into something a little bit more tangible. And this is just some of the examples of what we got out of the back of it. One of the benefits of having that data was being able to find and track our progress in finding our silence by creating focused tenant contact, just looking really at the 10% highest risk properties to make sure that we capture all of those rather than aimlessly trawling through all 3,000. And where that led us to looking at some of this data was that some of our highest risk properties were our 1950s and 60s bungalows, especially those with electric heating. And this links on quite well to the next slide, which is environmental monitoring. So the majority, perhaps 70% of our DMC cases are resolved by increasing ventilation, 10% or so by structural works, but 20% become longer term issues because of complications relating to overcrowding, hoarding, poor mental health, or other unknown imbalances. And this is where the environmental monitoring comes into its own, mainly because they focus on those hidden causes. I'll also add that we don't have a massive monitoring program. Some people that I speak to are anxious about the risk of installing lots of monitors, but not having the resources to deal with data. This is somewhat mitigated if you've got a resident app, but our experience is that it's the same as with our data collection modelling. You can apply what you find across other properties. We currently monitor about 2% of our homes, and we've learned a lot from that. So all of these case studies, they're real properties, but the names have been changed and they're photos of similar properties on the outside. But they do focus on mostly a similar archetype. So on the first slide, we'll meet Mrs. Smith, who's our first case study. She experienced damp and mould in her home over a number of years, with a number of remedial works having been carried out. When I visited, it was clear that there was a small area of relatively new penetrating dampness in one corner of the bedroom, but I felt very strongly that there were indications of severe condensation and cool internal temperatures. Mrs. Smith's view was that all internal issues related to structural defects, and that the only reasons that the temperatures were kept cool was that the humidity would rise with the heating on. So I arranged for an independent survey, and we carried out all of the recommended remedial works and also some ventilation improvements. But the environmental monitoring confirmed that the structural works were not a cause, and it highlighted that the heating levels were far too low, and it was really challenging in this case to keep the tenant on board. But an opportunity presented itself shortly after that, with a void property coming up on the same street, and we used it as a control property of sorts. While the property was empty, the heating was being renewed and the humidity and DMC risk was very high, despite there clearly being very little moisture being produced day to day. When the new tenant moved in, they put the heating up to reasonable levels, and the DMC risk dropped from close to 100 down to close to 0. And I was able to share this with Mrs. Smith and try to encourage her to trial it, even if just for a week, to test the benefit. And we haven't been able to achieve this yet, but as a result of the ventilation improvements, at least, we were able to demonstrate that we'd dropped her DMC risk from high to medium. So our second case study is Mrs. Lopez, and time-wise, I've got to kind of skip through it quite quickly, but the full study is available on LinkedIn. Her home had almost an identical presentation to our first case study, but the difference was that whenever we visited, it always felt quite warm, and during the discussion, she never raised any concerns about the heating. There were some very large items of furniture against the external walls, but other than that, there just wasn't really an obvious cause. Carried out some interventions, and again, these didn't resolve the issues. However, a fortunate combination of the monitoring and communication identified that Mrs. Lopez was flying abroad once or twice a year in the winter and leaving the heating off completely with no setback, leading to the home dropping to as little as 8 degrees, despite there being a programmable thermostat. So the home never really gets a chance to recover from that massive rise in humidity and the cooling of the walls and floor. A follow-up visit showed that the furniture was back up against the external walls. There's a condensation risk on the newly tanked walls and a real resistance to set up this setback temperature. But it does at least explain years of otherwise unexplained issues and a practical solution that's available to the tenant. The third case study is Maple Road, and this one was slightly different because we'd learned a lot more about this point, by this point. And we were very confident that it was a severe condensation issue because even the partition walls had absorbed enough moisture to give a borderline reference reading. The ventilation was increased to better meet the size of the household, which improved symptoms to some extent. The tenants were convinced, and understandably so, that there was water coming up through the floor slab, rising up the furniture. But floor hygrometer, calcium carbide, and salts analysis testing confirmed that this was not the case. Hygrothermal readings showed high levels of condensation, associated partly with high occupation, but mainly with slightly low heating levels. And I was monitoring this on a daily basis, and I noticed a sudden drop in humidity alongside an increase in temperature in just one room of the home. And the monitoring doesn't tell us exactly why this happened. A change in temperature could relate to a window being closed, the heating being turned on, or additional occupancy. But a phone call confirmed that the heating had been increased. So I advised about the positive impact, shared this data, and suggested to increase the heating just a little and signposted to financial support, but the heating level stayed the same until the end of the tenancy. But I carried on monitoring it over the next 2 months because I was aware of a significant event coming up. And there it was. I noticed a sudden and sustained drop in humidity relating to an increase in temperature. I checked the system and I could see that the event exactly matched the date of a mutual exchange or home swap. And I finally managed to get through to the new tenants a few months later, and they confirmed they had no issues at all. And you can see on the image on the left-hand side how the DMC risk rating plummets. And this is with no change in the building itself. And it's a really important point that this always was a building with no defects. It had overspec mechanical ventilation. And although high occupation was a factor, heating was a significant issue there. And we know that because it didn't reduce when the original family went away for a short period. So that just helped really to reassure us and also our tenants with the data that we've got. Our final case study is Anne and Dylan. This one was flagged by a GP who's concerned about the condition of Dylan's room, and I inspected the same week despite some initial access issues. Anne was very tearful, and she described numerous mental and physical health issues, as well as some terrible family circumstances leading to her grandson Dylan moving in with her. She told me about Dylan's autism and how he wouldn't engage with anyone or let people into his room, not even her most of the time. He wouldn't let anyone in to clean, and food and drinks would often be spilled on the floor and left. He'd been stung by a bee as a child, and as a result, he wouldn't open his curtains or blinds. And the photos don't do it justice, but my visits to Dylan's room over the next few weeks were the worst environment I've been in my life. It was dark, awful air quality, around about 95% humidity, and debris was just being blown around by a freestanding fan. And it's important to note that the inspection found no building, heating, or ventilation defect. On this next image, you can see to demonstrate this. These are two views of the same partition wall. On Anne's side, clean and fresh, and on Dylan's, a thick mould on all walls and ceilings. The great thing about the environmental monitoring in this case was being able to see the impacts of the interventions once we were able to get in. So you can see the humidity and DMC risk drop when Dylan did allow me to remove the curtains and install a fly screen. And then further when a positive input ventilation system was introduced directly into the room. And then over the next year, although the air was still quite stagnant and the risk remained, the mould didn't return. But another benefit of the long-term monitoring was not ticking things off as complete success just because of isolated success. Moving into the winter months, a chronic underheating was identified, leading to an increased DMC risk in all rooms. And we discussed this with Anne, however, she had no concerns and she declined advice or the offer of setting up the programmable thermostat. I need to be clear that this isn't our normal procedure. We absolutely do not have the resources to treat every complex damp and mould case like this. Stepping in with hours and hours of social care support provision, treating mould, renewing carpets. This was an exception, partly through necessity, partly through being able to use disabled adaptations budget, but also as a demonstration of the resources required for case studies just like this. As professionals, we need to be honest with ourselves and others about the challenges that we face. Sometimes condensation will persist in a home when it's not a building defect, but also not a lifestyle choice. This next section, which will be quite brief, is on nudge theory, and it's quite a new thing for us. And although nudge has been around for a while, so apologies for anyone who's already familiar, but for anyone who's not, nudge theory is a concept in behavioural science that involves subtly guiding people to make better choices without forcing or restricting their options. It works by changing the way choices are presented, making it easier for people to make decisions that benefit them or society. For example, placing healthier foods at eye level in a cafeteria encourages people to choose them, even though they can still choose other options. It's about creating small, positive nudges that influence behaviour in a gentle, non-intrusive way. There is an original nudge book, but I found that this book that you can see in the image is much more relevant for us due to its practical application in public service, and I'd strongly recommend it. We started applying this into a lot of our communication, and it does seem to be a lot better. On an individual basis, we've used the data from the environmental monitoring to move away from guides that we've provided previously. So not just telling everyone to program heating or setting it up automatically as turn on at 6:30 in the morning and then maybe 5:30 in the evening. And in this particular case, although it never came up in conversation, the monitoring highlighted that the shower was being used very early in the morning, around 4:30, which turned out to relate to shift work. The heating wasn't being put on at that time, so the humidity in the bathroom was spiking and then migrating to other rooms. So using it as an opportunity to test the limits of what we can do, I dropped that data along with some key facts about heat and condensation management and asked ChatGPT to create a personalised heating programme for this household and then to explain why it had done so in a nudge approach. And that's what you can see going on the screen there. And that was quite successful. And then we moved it into a wider way of things. We started looking at all of the homes that we're monitoring, and I've done some videos that go into a bit more detail on this, but essentially we wanted to use all of the data and find general principles that we could apply across the whole stock. And again, this is trying to move away from generic, true but unhelpful information. So the NHS, World Health Organization, and us, we all agree that 18 to 21 degrees is best for your health, but it's not necessarily best for our budget. And it's also not clear, is that supposed to be 24 hours a day? And if not, how long? What's the actual healthy, safe level and what's affordable? So what we did is we took all of our data and manipulated it and filtered it to try and answer some of those key questions. And part of the question was, what do homes which suffer from condensation mould have in common? What we found is it's homes that regularly drop to less than 15 degrees. It's homes that are less than 20 degrees on average over the whole year. Homes that have carbon dioxide levels that are on average over 1,000 parts per million, and those with spikes regularly over 2,000 parts per million. So we had something very specific. And then what we did is we were able to look at homes that are just outside of the risk zone, find out what their habits were, and set that as the minimum advice to be able to avoid it, rather than telling people what the ideal standard is. So in this case, it was between October and April having a setback of 15 degrees and then programming the heating to be 20 degrees for at least 7.5 hours a day. So that changed the advice across our whole stock. And then for the monitored homes, what we did is we created a template data sheet, which we could drag and drop information very simply, and then we could create tailored insight reports and action plans for each tenant. This was then telling them what they were doing really well and should continue, and what they should potentially be looking to tweak with a clear target, again using that nudge style communication. And it's really early days for us. We just want to add that extra value, but that's where we are. So hopefully this has been useful for everyone listening. Made it to the end, I think, hopefully on time.
Thanks very much, Rosie. Yeah, I can see Kerry nodding away. So yeah, some really great insights there about kind of like how every property is unique, and how you can adapt your approach based upon the data that you're collecting and what's going on inside the home. But yeah, really great to see some of the innovative approaches you're using. If we go straight over to Kerry, I think she's going to present on a very slightly different area, but also showing the experience that she's had in the damp and mold process and how it's changed over time. Kerry.
Hello, thanks very much for inviting me along, Sam. That was really interesting, Rosie. I got a lot out of that as well. I'm Kerry Dawson. I'm the operations team leader for Stirling Council and have been, as Sam said, for a long period of time. I rejoined the team here in repairs and maintenance in 2020 again. So I've been here for the past 4 years, predominantly focusing on damp and mould as part of my day-to-day job. So is that moving forward? Oh, there we go. So I just wanted to focus on a few key points. I was going to give some statistical information, talk about the policy and the process that we've started to do since 2020, look at the home link sensors, the Internet of Things, and a case study on that. Look at the regulatory changes that's coming in over Scotland pretty soon for 2025. And I put a slide in to ask questions, but Sam, obviously, you said to wait to the end, so that's absolutely fine. So in Stirling Council, our statistics are we've got slightly more than yourself, Rosie. We've got 6,000 plus properties, and that's a general mix, as you can see at the top right-hand corner. It's new builds. We've got a small percentage of new builds, and predominantly we're 1940s, 1950s upwards of properties. We've not got a high level of damp and mould across Stirling Council at all. In 2022-23, we had 72 properties that actually needed full-blown complex repairs. In 2023-24, we had 157 properties that really needed a lot of repairs. But as you can see, overall, we carry out about 25 surveys a week, and by one building surveyor that we've got, and that's roughly equating to 1,200 properties in the year. We do have a long geographical area. Some of our properties are rural, and we can spend 2 hours travelling to these properties to tackle some of the damp issues. But just to go back a bit, and COVID did cause a big issue. So you can see in 23-24, we did get more people coming forward with some damp and mould issues. So we went on to look at the policy and process changes. We implemented a new policy in 2023, and this was consulted with our tenants, our elected members, and it was implemented in 2023. I've put the links in case you have the slides. You can go in and have a look at our policy there. We also, in addition to that, put up guidance for our customers so that they could go in and self analyze. So, you know, when they've got damp, mould and condensation, and predominantly a lot of our properties are relatable to condensation related damp, and it was just giving them ideas, our tenants ideas, how to go in and tackle damp and mould, like, you know, put covers on your pots, don't dry washing inside, ventilating your properties, use your positive ventilation systems, etc. So then we changed the team. So in 2021, we started looking at changing the restructure of the team. And in 2024, I know it was quite a bit of a distance, but it was a new team at the time. We employed a building surveyor in January 2024. We started retraining all the operatives in the team. There's only 7. I've only got a ROT team of 7 operatives, so I retrained them all in damp and mould products. We also went to the wider responsive repairs team that I had and had them all trained as well. In August 2024, which was just recently because of a lot of the changes we were making, I employed a charge hand who comes in every week to ensure that the properties were carrying out complex repairs in for the following week, that we get tenant access, we're able to get asbestos checks and everything done prior to starting the work, so there's no delay. We've also got a monitoring assistant, and I know, Rosie, you said that you've not got the chance to have a monitoring assistant or somebody to monitor properties in the whole. We have got a monitoring assistant, but because we've got more and more Internet of Things and sensors in properties, we're looking at enhancing that. So our new change to the process, previously when I came back to the service, there was no any real team structure. There was inspections done but never followed up with work, etc. And tenants phoning in, complaining, looking for the damp and mold to be dealt with. So we changed the process. we go through our contact centre. Our contact centre take the first point of contact call from a tenant reporting damp and mould. We then that results in an inspection. We then record that inspection, and the building surveyor that goes out comes back to the service and provides a survey sheet, and that work is put into place. We've got a 90-day target once the building surveyor goes out and provides his report. So we've got 90 days to carry out that work. And within that 90 days, we're constantly in contact with the tenant. I have to report, we don't take 90 days. It's usually a lot quicker than that. So we've got a lot of recording the data. We touched on that earlier in Rosie's slides. We really record data the same way. We've implemented sensors in the properties, but predominantly we're putting these in our void properties, our homeless voids, and our mainstream tenancies. So I deal with the mainstream tenancies, but I know when they're allocated, they're already sensors put in so that I can start monitoring the behaviours in the property and any structural issues that are there that should have been caught at the void stage. We've went out to the market to look at new materials. We've started using a product, and I don't know if anybody's familiar with this product, but we were using a paint product, just normal antifungal paint, to cover some of the damp and mould spores that we found relating to condensation damp. But we went to the Wicamol product, which is a 3-way product that's got thermalite beads in the property. It gives us a 5-year guarantee that when we actually go in and paint, that it gives us that 5-year guarantee, and we can monitor that to see that it's actually working. It's been very successful, and I'm really happy with that. The other things that were reported back from my team when I was restructuring was the use of materials, their hand tools, etc. So we took a small contract with Hilti Tools, and we got them better nail guns, to make it more effective than what we had before. And we bought new damp meters, and we installed PIV units in all our void properties as well, and monitors. We've started doing a robust and invasive asbestos check, as I said earlier, to avoid delays. So that's a new process that we've started as well, and that's working really well because we're not having to start a job, leave the tenant waiting to finish because we had an issue with asbestos that's under a bathroom floor, etc. So we've done that, and we've also just recently started a new tender process for our independent surveys that we do need at court, so that we can see that we've done our survey and there's been an independent survey. So we've got a contractor for that as well. So the journey that we've been on with Aico and HomeLink has been a godsend to us, to be honest. We started the journey in 2017. It was my colleagues that started this, and I've been working with HomeLink since 2020. It's a 3-way partnership between the HomeLink tenants and Stirling Council. We had a tenant group, and HomeLink came across, and what we did was we agreed that we would put in 3 sensors in all the properties to record the heat, humidity and CO2. We tested and developed the resident app. We actually supported HomeLink develop the resident app, which you can see on the screen there. Wee Linky's flashing away on the mobile phone, telling you if it's warm or cold, or you need to take action. We won a COSLA award for this as well, which we're very proud of as a service and an organisation. As you can see, we've installed 770 sensors, and obviously we've got residents' apps for the properties that are occupied. I'm not going to go in and tell you we've put them back in these properties because I've said that several times. But as you'll see from the resident app, it does show you when it's hot and cold. And what's great for the tenant, and they seem to like it, our tenants, they come back because they feel empowered, that they're able to see and take action on what it's saying on the app to do. So for example, your kitchen's really humid. Well, you open the windows, you ventilate, so it's telling you you do that. So really, really successful. We're really happy with that. Our dashboard, as you can see, the benefits of that Similar to what Rosie was saying, you know, we've got the traffic light system where we can see and prioritise properties that we've got out of these 770 properties. You can filter that on heat and humidity, and we take a snapshot of that in time. So every week we get 10 properties and we have a look at that, and we drill down into see what's happening in each individual property. And, you know, we can see if somebody's taking a shower late at night and it spikes up and they're not ventilating the bathroom, and there's no heat getting out. So we can see all that. We know people are not living in the property because there's no heating and there's no CO2 recorded in it as well. So it's good for abandoned properties as well. We can see what's getting abandoned or not getting used. Our benefits is it's reducing responsive repairs. We've got improved customer improvement experience because we've got a proactive approach. We're actually taking early interventions because we've got these sensors going into our void properties. We can look at welfare. We've got an energy officer. We've recruited an energy officer that actually goes out and works with the tenants and helps them get benefits and looks at their energy costs and works with our customers to make sure that they're getting the best energy efficiency within their properties. And again, the app just shows you things that tenants can do, which again, they're feeling empowered with. So this is one of my case studies. As you can see from the photographs, it's the one below here is, and the one up here is the cupboard. All this equipment and all this storage was in this cupboard. So the tenant was wondering why our cupboard was becoming damp and mold because there was no air circulation, there was no airflow. But the problem with this property, and it was a decant, we had to decant the tenant because it was illegal, it was an eviction. And sadly, because of COVID, the tenant kind of buried her head in the sand, didn't come forward, and it got to the stage where there was no rent getting paid. She'd had significant problems in her life, and she buried her head in the sand and didn't tell us that there was issues in the property until it went to court for eviction. So it's still an ongoing case. We discovered that you can see the attic here, it's been converted. We didn't know she'd converted it, never asked for permission, so it wasn't done properly. So that's been the significant root cause in this property when we managed to get in. As Rosie said earlier in her slides, it's a challenge to get in. It's a complete challenge sometimes to get in and deal with our customers, and I appreciate that. This was a particularly challenging case. It's still ongoing in terms of eviction, but as you can see from the bathroom here, she installed this herself as well. When the water's in the bath, it's rolling out the bath into the floor down to the kitchen. So there was significant work in causing water to penetrate into the kitchen. We stripped it all back. We did all the work in the tenants back into the property. We're providing support. We're giving educational support, and we're seeing such a difference. We've put the sensors in, and we've got quite a success story here because she's not getting evicted, and we're trying to work with the tenant as a result. I might be running out of time, so I kept my other slide off, but we did have a case study in the Raploch area of Stirling, and this was a tenant similar to what Rosie said. Water was coming down. It was heavy condensation. We worked with HomeLink on this, and it was a case of the tenants. We could see from the Internet of Things sensors that they gathered at certain times in the property. They were drying clothes, and it turned out that they were doing all their family's laundry in the one house, but no heating and ventilating the property. So that's why the water was running down the walls, and we were working with them on that. So that's another success story because they were decanted. The same thing happened there, and that's why we identified the root cause and were able to work with them every week. So we never normally do that. We never work with customers every week, but we are working with them to educate them and support them in their property and to sustain it being habitable. So the slide I've got here is the regulatory changes. I can't say that word, but the Scottish Housing Regulator have now came forward and gave us a deadline of the 8th of November to do the consultation on damp and mould indicators that are required. Personally, I don't know if they go far enough. I think we could go a wee bit further with them. and some of them might need more clarification. However, I think it's a great start, and I think it's brilliant that the regulator's making us look at these indicators in more details. So the three that they've decided to come forward consultant is the average time to resolve damp and mould. Well, we're doing that at the moment as an organisation, and we're able to provide that information. We've got a 90-day target time. They're looking at the percentage of resolved cases reopened for damp and mould in the reporting year, which again is good. However, all the organisations, I don't know if this is the same in England, but in our landlords in Scotland, we've all got different year-end reports. Housing associations are different from councils. I go from April to March. Some go from October to September. So it's hard to kind of benchmark against that, but it's a good indicator nonetheless. And the number of open cases at year end, again, the reporting years are different for each service. So the future service changes we're currently looking at, we're about to work and embark on a journey again with HomeLink to look at the case management system so that we have this robust portfolio and on every property. That will then support the indicator for the 12-month review for the Scottish Housing Regulator, because we would be monitoring continually through that. So the 12-month review wouldn't be an impact on us for that. The monitoring officer, we're going to go out to further recruitment because we're installing at least 500 sensors each year from now on. So we're going to need more resource, and it's going to be more resource intensive to do that. And the last thing we're looking at going forward is the early intervention and taking a more proactive approach. We're looking to kind of go into schools and start educating our future tenants to see and educate them to see how, if they were moving into a property, and educate them how to deal with any issues that they find, and hopefully will not have any mould and damp in their properties, but they'll recognise through education what it is and how to prevent it. So to summarise, we're just looking to make sure that all our properties are habitable and that our tenants' homes are safe and secure. Any questions, Sam?
Great, thanks, Kerry. Yeah, we'll come to some questions if there's any at the end.
Yeah.
But just a reminder again there, to get those questions into the Q&A box at the bottom. Thanks very much, Kerry. That was really great. Really great to get some insight into the way you change your processes and kind of the level of resources needed, and also the proactive nature of what you've been doing. Yeah, we are a little bit tight for time, so I'm going to go straight over to Ian for his presentation now. Ian.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to present you today. Representing Nuair, I'll be talking to you about how ventilation should form a part of effective strategies for managing damp and mould in social housing properties. Let me just share my screen. Okay, Sam, is that working okay?
Yeah, all good. Thanks, Ian.
Perfect. So, why we ventilate? At Nuair, we understand the challenges that damp and mould present, not just for property upkeep, but also for the well-being of occupants inside the home. So today we'll cover several strategies that target the main cause of condensation dampness, focusing on solutions that are both efficient and sustainable in a social housing context. But beginning with, why do we need to ventilate? I think most people here today are very familiar with lots of these, but we're just going to cover off some of the basic everyday. Breathing adds significant moisture to the air inside our homes without adequate.
Sorry, Ian, we just lost you there. So your slides have just disappeared.
Oh. Okay. Let me try and share again.
Okay, great. We've got you back.
Okay, so yeah, I was just covering off why we ventilate in the first place. A lot of routine daily activities caused inside the home. Without adequate ventilation, this moisture will accumulate, leading to poor indoor environment, ripe for condensation, damp and mould. So in some form of perspective, an average household of 2 adults and 2 children can generate over 120 pints of moisture each week. With many of us now working from home, than ever before, moisture levels are likely exceeding this figure. This excess moisture, when combined with insufficient ventilation, poses a risk to both the property and the occupant's health. Sorry, Sam, I'm having trouble moving to the next slide.
Okay. If you'd like to just carry on with your next slide, just if you just talk it, I can just try and get them up from my end and share them.
Are we back onto guidance
Yes,
documents?
guidance documents now, yes.
Okay, fine. So aside from Part F building regs, anyone with a responsibility for indoor air quality in homes should also use documents such as these shown on the screen, and be familiar with them. So we've got Fitness for Human Habitation Act, the Government Clean Air Strategy for 2019, Housing Health and Safety Rating System, or the HHSRS, and finally Indoor Air Quality at Home, which is the most recent of the guidance documents. So first of all, before we start looking at strategies, and as I say, I'm here in terms of looking at it from a ventilation perspective, it's really important to understand the root cause of damp and mould. And therefore, what causes it in the first place. So broadly speaking, there are 3 types of damp to be aware of. We've got rising damp, penetrative damp, and then condensation dampness. The most common type and usually caused by excess moisture in the air that isn't adequately ventilated. And research indicates that over 90% of damp and mould problems are linked to inadequate ventilation. Sorry, I don't know why we're having this issue with So in terms of ventilation strategies, we'll take a look at the key types of ventilation that can be used. So first of all, we've got natural ventilation, which is use of intermittent extract fans, but critically in combination with background ventilators in windows, trickle vents. We then move on to mechanical extract ventilation, so continuous extract ventilation, which is either in the form of decentralized fans you'll be familiar with within kitchens and bathrooms, or a centralized unit that will incorporate ducts into extract from both kitchens and bathrooms. Then there's MVHR, more typically found in new build, although we are beginning to see it in some retrofit or decarbonisation schemes. And then finally, something that is very closely linked to damp and mould strategies is PIV. Sorry, Sam, this isn't working, so I don't know if you can show.
How about, yeah, if I share them and see if that makes any difference.
Please, if you don't mind. So we're on slide 6.
How's that?
Yeah, that's it. That's perfect. So if you run through, okay. So extract fans are fitted in wet rooms, okay, and provide rapid extraction of moisture and pollutants at source. So we've got
Okay.
just got.
Sorry, that's my fault.
So extract fans can be intermittent or more commonly now continuous in operation. So with a continuous low level speed, which commonly known as trickle rate, and then with the ability to boost, often either off a light switch by a humidity sensor or perhaps a pull cord. An efficient extract fan will remove moisture from the air, preventing condensation and the associated problems and improve indoor air quality. Although it is important that we remember that extract fans do form part of the system. So undercuts on doors, trickle vents in windows are critical. Our range of extract fans are designed to operate in conjunction with rapid ventilation options, such as obviously opening windows and through background ventilation, as I mentioned, in trickle vents. So if we could just move on there. Okay, so we have typically two types of extract fans that we sell into the social housing market, which I'm sure a number of people attending today will be familiar with. So we've got both the Faith Plus and Cavan. The Cavan is a centrifugal fan. Both offer features and benefits that enable a ventilation rate which will achieve Part F rates, but also assist social landlords in ensuring the fan is operating, has been used as intended. More recently, the 5-inch spigot on the feature on the Cavan with the increased ventilation rates has become particularly significant. Okay, then we move on to continuous centralized continuous mechanical extract ventilation. So as I mentioned, it's a centralized system, works in exactly the same way, providing a background continuous rate or trickle rate with the ability to boost off a number of different controls. Typically seen in flats and apartments, or can be awkward to install in existing properties. But we do see that from time to time. Moving on to MVHR. Again, as I mentioned earlier, due to the challenges with installing MVHR with the duct branch network, quite often we'll exclusively see this in a new build scenario. But with decarbonisation and retrofit schemes, we are seeing it from time to time in social housing. The key really with MVHR is ensuring that good quality installation to avoid to achieve an install that gives the ventilation rate required without excessive noise. And achieves reliability. So move on, please. Thank you. So PIV, it's perfect for retrofitting into properties. There's commonly on the market, not just from Newair, but from competitors as well. Will be a loft-mounted version as well as a wall-mounted version. Loft-mounted version can be, or at least the Newair loft-mounted version can be hung within the loft. So very, very quick and easy installation. Critically, it provides whole house ventilation. So providing ventilations to bedrooms as opposed to the direct ventilation that extract fans provide to kitchen and bathrooms. PIV has existed since the early 1970s, so we've got over 5 decades of case studies and history sort of proving that it has successfully worked in preventing excessive condensation, which can lead to damp and mould. Another advantage is the fact that you have fewer external penetrations in the facade. So as we're looking to make our building fabric more energy efficient, that's an additional benefit too. Okay, so as I mentioned, there's different types of PIV available. So there's wall-mounted units, also those with heaters and various types of controls depending on specific applications. Move on to the next screen, please, Sam. Thank you. Oh. Okay, there's a image missing there. So we're just talking about addressing over occupancy here and future proofing in particular. With the advent of the latest building regs, Part F ventilation rates, which increased considerably, with the issues of over occupancy and also reacting to specific cases, problem cases, there's really a growing demand to be able to provide flexible ventilation. So the ability to be able to increase ventilation rates, perhaps modify control systems, etc., as beyond the initial installation. So it's important to consider these sort of applications as well. Okay, and then just going back to a point I touched on earlier, critically, and particularly when there's a very high percentage of ventilation strategies that use extract fans in the kitchen and bathroom, we have to remember that it's formed as part of a system, and therefore duct runs are important. They're considered carefully, they're designed and then installed well. Triple vents in windows, an extract fan is designed as indicated by the guidance in Part F to use alongside background ventilation through windows. 10 mil undercut in the doors that allows the transfer of air throughout the property, and without those undercuts, you really take away the capability of the ventilation to work properly. And then, of course, the external grille as well. So it must be free of obstruction, and certainly not using things like gravity flat grills on a continuously running fan, because that will only cause problems in the future. So how can New Air help? Various assistance in terms of training, CPDs that can be a benefit in terms of looking at ventilation generally, or more specific cases such as specific look at damp and mould awareness. Where we've talked as well about the importance of installation, that also extends to setting a product up, commissioning it, setting it to the correct speed. We can assist with that with toolbox talks and on-site support. Also offer a design service as well, so more complicated ventilation systems may need support on that side of things. And then, of course, if there are issues, we've got a dedicated after-sales team, technical customer services, and also happy to offer product trials as well for those interested in new products. So in terms of a summary and here a recommendation, I think the critical thing really is that to try and be proactive and have a look at a ventilation strategy that's in place, that's effective in the first place across the broad range of properties within a client's portfolio. And we're recognizing popularity of ventilation choices, continuous running fans that are capable of meeting building regs, capable of running continuously with boost, monitoring usage by occupants. These things are critical. And then moving on, then positive input ventilation. We've heard it mentioned already a couple of times prior to me joining the webinar. We've seen a track history of PIV being successful in eliminating the risk of excessive condensation and damp and mould within properties. So PIV would be a recommendation where we need to sort of provide something that's over and above a sort of a standard ventilation strategy. So, as I say, so we're sort of looking at a recommended approach combines these solutions to create a robust and reliable ventilation system that not only meets regulatory standards, but also directly addresses root cause. So the ability to be flexible where necessary as well. Thank you, and sorry about the technical hitches there.
No worries. Thanks very much, Ian. I think we got through, so that's no problem at all. We are going to extend the webinar by about 10 minutes. So if anyone would like to stay on to hear the rest of Tim's presentation and for a few questions at the end, you're very welcome to do so. Straight over to Tim to do his slides, I think.
Hello. Am I sharing all right? I can't see on the screen.
Yeah, if you can just go to the presentation view. Yeah, that's it. Thanks, Tim.
Brilliant. Can you hear me all right? Cool. Hello, everyone. So I'm Tim Walker. I'm a research fellow at University of Exeter. And I'm going to talk to you a bit about the research we've been doing around sensor systems to create healthier social housing. So stepping a little bit out from just focusing on damp and mould, I'm going to talk about the work we've done around looking at the social value that can also be generated from sensor systems. So yeah, the context of this research has been covered by these talks, but it really is that link between housing and health, and how that and housing is a determinant of our public health outcomes and healthcare costs. And one of the main drivers and pathways of that is through the indoor environment, as we know. And this is because we spend around 70% of our time indoors, and that increases to around 90% for those in older or in poorer health. So we know the issues of damp and mould, but lots of other issues in the homes. And down in Cornwall, we have issues with radon as well, as we're based on granite. So as already been discussed, sensor systems are a potential solution for creating healthier homes, both through kind of the ability of the landlord to do proactive repairs, but also the potential provision of that information to the residents, as well as help better manage their own home environment. So we've been doing some research around sensor systems. The team down in Exeter in the Falmouth campus have been since 2017, working primarily with coastline housing. So our project started in 2017 when sensor systems were quite novel and new, and it was quite cutting edge, and it's quite amazing to see how it's becoming standard practice now. So back in 2017, we looked into kind of the acceptability of these sensor systems from the perspective of the residents, and the usefulness of these systems from the housing association's perspective. And our research was focused on a central area of Cornwall with high levels of deprivation and issues with radon in there as well. And our later research has been looking at the potential of sensor systems to support health and care services. So can you also spot changing health risks and changing conditions in that sensor data? As these systems are across so many homes now, what else could they potentially be used for? So one of the preliminary findings from this work is that when people are reporting poorer health, their CO2 levels are higher. And maybe because they're in one room or not ventilating as much. But that data could potentially inform kind of care services to do more proactive support and care. So just some findings around kind of what the residents are saying in terms of what they said to us about having sensor systems in the home. We found that they actually find them quite acceptable. They're unlike kind of video or audio recording. It hasn't been really considered too much of an invasion of privacy. Some residents even like having them. They feel like that there's someone looking out for them, and there's a sense of kind of reassurance. In terms of the importance of the housing association, trust is really important. Residents do have concerns for how the data is used, how it's managed. But if you've got a good trusting relationship, that does facilitate the use of sensor systems. In terms of the effectiveness of the residents' dashboard, so in this project, we provided the residents with their own dashboard so they could see their own data, but different from Kerry's experience with the HomeLink dashboard. This dashboard perhaps wasn't so intuitive as the HomeLink one, but we found that there was very low usage by the residents of the dashboard, and they tend to kind of abandon using it after about 4 times. And then we looked at the residents' use of the dashboard, and if there'd ever been any kind of changes in the indoor environment data as a result of using the dashboard. And we found minimal effect. And when we interviewed the residents, it was down to there's lots of other factors that really determined if they could do anything about it. But with the advent of much more intuitive dashboards and the nudge, kind of that really smart stuff around nudging, more sort of clever ways of communicating rather than just WHO statistics about what the house should be, that might have moved forward a bit. And as been touched on lots, it is these systems are super useful for the housing association. So I'll skip over this slide as I really appreciate we're running out of time. If you are interested in this research, it is available open access. You can find it online. What I wanted to get to is the idea that beyond the kind of benefits for the residents and the housing provider, there is also these systems have the potential to create kind of a wider social impact. So what we know is that cold homes, for example, cost the NHS around £1.3 billion every year in hospital and primary care admissions. And by housing associations addressing fuel poverty in cold homes, there is a potential to have kind of social impact, an impact on public services. So to look into the social value that can potentially be created from sense systems, we teamed with Aico, funded by the Engineering Physical Science Research Council as well, and HAT, which are an organisation which specialised in social value kind of evaluation, the Housing Association Charitable Trust, and we set up a project to kind of forecast the social value which could be generated from these sense systems. So what is social value? It might be a new term that you've come across. Is essentially it's a method to quantify how different interventions positively affect people's lives. And it was a method developed to kind of identify kind of the outcomes and benefits for the society beyond the financial sort of metrics would cover or the business case would cover. At the heart of what social value is this idea of financial proxies. So these are essentially estimations on the social outcomes and benefits of a particular project. So they could be the outcomes in relation to the direct impact for an individual's well-being and quality of life and health, that you can start to monetize that, or the indirect impacts on kind of society. And in this case, it's really directly related to savings for kind of public services. So to give you some material examples of what I'm talking about by these proxies, the ability for someone to heat their household in the winter has been calculated by the Social Value Bank to be £6,119, and that's based on the per person cost savings to the NHS of not living in a cold home. And a proxy very much related to this webinar is the rectification of damp and mould. So that's been calculated at £6,305 per household in relation to the increased cost to the NHS of developing ASPA. So what we did is we looked at Coastline Housing's use of the sense system over a 21-month period. And in this period, Coastline staff used the dashboard that we've developed, you can see it in the image there, to identify high-risk properties, conduct surveys, conduct repairs, and support the residents to address those issues. And for that period, 21 months, there was a kind of a sense system manager who kind of oversaw 2 people that were basically using the dashboard for 1 or 2 days a week and following up with residents. We worked with Aico and Coastline to kind of cost up the cost of the personnel and the technology. And then we looked at to kind of evaluate it. We looked at the records of the calls made to the residents, resident satisfaction data, the logs about repairs which have happened, to kind of get an idea of the outputs that have been generated as a result. So out of those 145, 40 homes were identified as high risk, specifically with low temperature and high humidity. And out of those 40 were then provided with advice about high humidity and damp and mould and around fuel poverty. And then out of those 145, 12 received damp and mould rectification work, which includes all the interventions that have been discussed already, especially the positive input ventilation unit was found to be very successful by Coastline Housing. Lots of them went in, but alongside the other ventilation systems that were discussed in the previous presentation. The Coastline Housing also helped to address fuel poverty by working with the residents to provide energy vouchers, hardship fund, and also working with the resident to kind of negotiate a discount with their energy provider. So as Rosie spoke about, these cases, there's only 5, but they can be quite intensive and last a long time to actually sort that kind of issue out with the fuel poverty. It's a lot of work there. And overall, all of these residents reported that their satisfaction increased because of the kind of proactive response of Coastline Housing. So what you can see here, this is a table that shows the total social value outcomes of the project. when you put kind of how many were achieved against the values, and say around £250,000 of social value was generated according to Hacked and the Social Value Bank on the evidence we provided. And you can see the majority of that comes from the ability to obtain advice locally. So that relates to all the phone calls and support that Coastline Housing actually provided to those residents to kind of help self-manage the indoor environment, but also lots of value created by fuel poverty interventions and the rectification of damp and mould. So what that shows you, a long-winded way of saying, is that if you put the costs of running a census system against the outcomes of the social value outcomes, there is a return on investment. You can get a return on investment ratio, and our research shows that for every £1 spent on a census system, you can get £2.68 worth of social value, showing a positive return on investment. But that number probably doesn't mean much if you've not thought about social value before. So think about what other comparable interventions. So for an intervention which addresses homelessness, which is obviously a hugely important social issue, you usually get about £5 return. And for an intervention addressing kind of exercise for adults and children, usually get about a £2 return. So it's a positive and realistic social return investment for something that's a project that's addressing health outcomes. In terms of the strengths and limitations of social value, if you are interested, it's easy to use and off the shelf, and it's standardized across the housing sector. But what we found is quite difficult and time intensive to collect the data. I will skip over this because I appreciate we're well over time. If you are interested to know more, we've produced this stuff into some guides, and they are freely available online, and there's some diagrams and things that might be of use in there. And going back to mould specifically, the research team have actually produced a few papers on mould, which are also freely available online. So just contact us if you're interested, especially around mould modelling, which is not my area, but my colleague's area. I'll finish. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Tim. Yeah, and I would.
Really.
No worries. I would recommend everyone have a look at those guides on social value. They're really interesting to read, and also those other papers as well. And like I said, the presentation will be recorded and shared, so you can get those QR codes there. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for the panelists so far, doing a great job of answering some of the Q&A questions in the background. I do have a question. I'm going to open up to Rosie, and this is directly to you. So if you've surveyed the property and talked through the data or advice of the resident, if they still experience damp and mould issues, what is your approach?
So it's definitely on a home by home and household by household basis, and it really depends on the individual or individuals you're working with. Sometimes it's a case of just really gently working through it and doing one small step at a time and then seeing the positive outcomes. Sometimes it's a case of making it a multi-agency approach and bringing in other support agencies to try and help. That can be quite a slow process because of the lack of lack of funding for a lot of these services. Ultimately, though, sometimes you just provide all the support and information and leave it with a tenant or a resident to say, this is the solution, and when you're ready, come to us. But the reality is sometimes it might take 3 years to get from one place to another, and you just have to constantly be there and say, we're here when you're ready. But the reality is it's like with any other public service, things like smoking or weight loss or anything like that. Someone's got to be ready and receptive to it, and they've also got to trust what you're saying, because it's really, really hard. Like with all the smoking and weight and anything like that, it's not a simple solution. So ultimately, from a compliance background, when we're looking at that from that perspective, sometimes unfortunately you can't tick things off as complete very neatly, and there may well be cases where it just exists and there's not really a lot we can do about it. But generally we found that the ombudsman and the courts are quite understanding of that, and as long as you can demonstrate really clearly you've done everything and ideally a little bit more that you should legally do and have good practice, then that's normally all we can be expected to do.
Great. Yeah, and Kerry, do you have any experience in that sort of area as well?
Yeah, just to reiterate what Rosie said, you know, we can take all the approaches that you possibly can. It's all about education to our customers and working together, and it's the support that's there as well. We really focus on education and providing support to tenants. And we do look at different approaches, but we tend to feel our approach at the moment is where we need to be. I'm just really mirroring what Rosie's saying in terms of her approach. We're doing the same. It's really interesting to see that other people are doing similar things, and we're learning from each other as we're going along. But nothing else to add to that. Sorry, Sam.
Right. No, thank you very much. And yeah, so I mean, I'm sure there's loads of questions that could be asked around the topics we've kind of explored in this webinar. Unfortunately, we're not going to have any time for any more. But hopefully you found it useful. We've had some good positive feedback already about the speakers. I think we probably could have filled about 3 hours with it in the end. But yeah, thank you again for everyone for joining us. Special thanks to our speakers for sharing all the great insights that they've shared today and throughout the whole of Damp and Mould Action and Awareness Week. Really hope these sessions have provided some new ideas, new perspectives, inspiration for landlords to kind of take away and implement and improve their repair processes and housing delivery. That was the purpose of this week, really. So yeah, as we kind of draw the week to a close, we're massively grateful for the input and outreach feedback that we've received from everyone who's been involved. Some really great events have been going on around the country. And just to say that we hope to make this a kind of an annual event. So keep your eyes peeled towards the end of the summer, I guess, next year, where we'll be lining up some more events and more things to push this forward again to kind of make bigger impact in this really critical area. So yeah, I guess all that's left to say is thank you again, everyone, for joining us, for sticking with us. I think about 90% of people who were at the start are still here, so really engaged audience. And yeah, I hope you all have a really great weekend. Thanks very much, everyone.